The first shot rang out as Dahlia Owens ducked behind the water trough, her heart pounding against her ribs like a terrified rabbit. Montana Territory, 1875, a place that should have promised freedom but had become her prison. Blood trickled down her arm from where the bullet had grazed her, and the shouts of angry men echoed through Nevada City's dusty Main Street. "Find that thieving woman. She can't have gone far." The cruel voice of Victor Rawlins, the most feared man in Madison County, carried on the evening air. Dahlia pressed her back against the rough wooden trough, willing her breathing to slow. The stolen documents tucked inside her bodice felt like they were burning against her skin. Evidence of land theft, murder, and corruption papers that could hang Rawlins and his gang if they reached the federal marshal. Papers worth killing for. The pounding of boots grew closer. Dahlia glanced frantically around the darkening street. Most businesses had closed for the evening, and no one would risk crossing Rawlins to help her. Her gaze landed on a small cabin at the edge of town with a rickety porch raised just high enough off the ground that a person might squeeze underneath. Making her decision, Dahlia waited until the searching men turned down an alley, then sprinted across the open ground, her skirts clutched in one hand. She dove beneath the porch just as more shouts erupted behind her. Pressing herself against the cool earth, she slid as far back as possible, cobwebs catching in her hair, the smell of damp soil filling her nostrils. Above her, boots thudded across the porch boards. The door opened and closed. More footsteps pounded past on the street. Dahlia held her breath, certain the thundering of her heart would give her away. Minutes stretched into an hour as darkness fell completely. The sounds of the search moved farther away. Finally, Dahlia allowed herself to breathe more deeply, though she dared not move. The cabin's owner would return eventually, and then what would she do? As if summoned by her thoughts, the steady rhythm of horses' hooves approached. A man whistled a low tune as he dismounted. Dahlia pressed deeper into her hiding spot as boots landed heavily on the ground, then climbed the porch steps. The door opened, and light spilled from within as a lantern was lit. Dahlia waited, hoping the man would go to bed and she could slip away in the night, but her luck had run out. A stream of liquid suddenly splashed near the edge of the porch, the cabin's owner relieving himself before turning in, and then came the words that made her blood freeze. "Might as well come out from under there," a deep voice said calmly. "I can see your skirts sticking out." Dahlia remained motionless, considering her options. "Run, fight, beg, I ain't got all night," the voice continued. "And if you're hiding under my porch, you've got a reason. Better tell me before those fellas making all that racket in town come looking here." Slowly, Dahlia began to inch forward. What choice did she have? As she emerged into the faint light of early evening, she found herself looking up at a tall man with a weathered face. He wasn't pointing a gun at her, which she took as a good sign. "Well now," he said, pushing his hat back on his forehead. "You're certainly not what I expected to find under my porch tonight." Dahlia stood shakily, brushing dirt from her torn dress. "I'm sorry for trespassing. I'll be on my way." The man's eyes narrowed as he took in her bloodied arm and the fear in her eyes. "Those men in town, they looking for you." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Name's Preston Northrup," he said. "Most folks call me Prees, and you'd better come inside before they think to search my place." Dahlia hesitated. "How do I know you won't hand me over to them?" Preston Northrup's face hardened. "Madam, I don't know what trouble you're in, but I know Victor Rawlins and his gang. If they're hunting you, you've either done something mighty brave or mighty foolish. Either way, I ain't in the habit of feeding lambs to wolves." The mention of Rawlins' name made Dahlia's decision. This stranger knew her pursuer, which meant he likely knew what the man was capable of. She followed Preston inside. The cabin was simple but tidy: a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, a bed in the corner, and shelves lined with books that surprised her. Not many men in these parts were readers. "Sit," Preston said, gesturing to a chair. He poured water from a pitcher into a basin and tore a clean strip from a shirt. "Let me see that arm." Dahlia flinched as he approached, but allowed him to examine the wound. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands so calloused and strong. "Just a graze," he muttered. "You're lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Dahlia replied. "I ran in a zigzag pattern." A slight smile touched Preston's lips. "Smart. Got a name, Dahlia. Dahlia Owens." Preston dampened the cloth and carefully cleaned the blood from her arm. "What you do to get Rollins and his boys so riled up, Miss Owens?" Dahlia weighed her options. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but this man was helping her when no one else would. "I took something that belongs to me," she finally said. Preston raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Hungry?" At the mention of food, Dahlia's stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since morning. Embarrassed, she nodded. Preston moved to the stove and stoked the embers, adding kindling until a small fire caught. He pulled a pot from a shelf and began preparing a simple stew with dried meat and vegetables. "You a rancher?" Dahlia asked, trying to gauge what kind of man had taken her in. "Horse breeder," he replied. "Got a small spread just outside town. Come in once a week for supplies and to check if I've got mail." He stirred the pot. "What about you? You're not from around here." "I was a school teacher in Helena," she said, offering a bit of truth. "Until recently." Preston nodded as if that explained everything, though it explained nothing at all. A sudden pounding on the door made them both freeze. Preston quickly motioned for Dahlia to hide in a small adjoining room that seemed to serve as a pantry. She slipped inside, leaving the door cracked just enough to hear. "Evening, Northrup," came a voice Dahlia recognized as one of Rollins' men. "Seen anything unusual tonight? Just the usual drunks and card players," Preston replied evenly. "Something wrong? Looking for a woman?" "Dark hair, blue dress, about this high. Thief and troublemaker. Rollins is offering $50 to anyone who spots her." $50 is good money," Preston said, his tone neutral. "What'd she steal?" "Some papers. Nothing that concerns decent folk. You see her, you let us know." "Rollins doesn't take kindly to people helping thieves." "Never been one to cross Victor Rollins," Preston said. "I'll keep my eyes open." The door closed and boots thumped away across the porch. Dahlia remained hidden, her breath shallow, until Preston called to her. "They're gone," he said as she emerged. "For now." "I should leave," Dahlia said. "I've put you in enough danger already." Preston shook his head. "They'll have men watching the roads out of town. You'll never make it." He ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the table. "Eat first. Then we'll figure out what to do." The stew was simple but delicious to Dahlia's hungry stomach. As she ate, Preston kept glancing toward the window, keeping watch for unwanted visitors. "Those papers you took," he finally said, "must be mighty important for Rollins to set his dogs loose like this." Dahlia set down her spoon. "Important enough to get me killed, apparently. And important enough for you to risk stealing them." She met his gaze. "They prove he's been forging land deeds, stealing property from legitimate settlers, even from the Blackfeet on the reservation borders. When people complain, they have accidents." She touched the documents hidden in her dress. 3 families have been burned out, 2 men shot for trespassing on what was rightfully their own land. Preston's expression darkened. "Tom and Ezra Winters," Dahlia nodded, surprised. "You knew them?" "Ezra broke horses for me last spring." Preston's jaw tightened. "Word was they challenged a property line and got themselves killed for it. Rollins claimed self-defense." "It wasn't." Dahlia's voice was cold. "And I can prove it. These papers show the original deeds and Rollins' forgeries. If I can get them to Judge Harmon in Fort Benton, Harmon's an honest man, Preston agreed. But Fort Benton is 4 days' hard ride from here, and Rollins won't give up easily. He studied her face. Why are you doing this? Those men weren't your kin. Dahlia looked down at her bowl. My brother Daniel worked as a clerk in the land office in Helena. He discovered the forgeries and was going to report them. He was shot in the back 3 weeks ago. Her voice caught. The official report said it was a robbery gone wrong, but nothing was taken, not even his watch. Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. So you came to finish what he started. I worked in that office too, helping Daniel during school breaks. I knew where to find the evidence. Dahlia's hands trembled slightly. I didn't plan to steal anything. I just wanted to look to be sure. But once I saw the papers, I knew I had to take them. No one else was going to bring Rollins to justice. Preston was silent for a long moment. You're either the bravest or the most foolhardy woman I've ever met. Probably both, Dahlia admitted with a faint smile. Preston rose and moved to a trunk in the corner of the room. He opened it and removed a revolver, checking that it was loaded. You know how to use one of these, Dahlia nodded. Daniel taught me. Good. Because tomorrow we're going to get you out of Nevada City and you'll need to be able to defend yourself. He handed her the gun. Dahlia looked up at him in surprise. Mr. Northrup, I appreciate your help, but this isn't your fight. Preston's face was grim. Rollins and his men have been squeezing this territory dry for too long. Good folks afraid to speak up, land stolen, people disappearing. Maybe it wasn't my fight yesterday, but it is now. He glanced out the window again. Get some rest. You can take the bed, I'll sleep by the door. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. Dahlia wanted to argue, but exhaustion was claiming her. The events of the day, the wound on her arm and the constant fear had drained her completely. Thank you, she said simply. Preston nodded once, then took up his position in a chair by the door, rifle across his lap. Dahlia removed her boots and lay down on the simple bed, the revolver tucked beneath the pillow. Despite her certainty that sleep would elude her, she drifted off almost immediately. She dreamed of her brother, of gunshots and fire, of papers burning to ash in her hands. And through it all, the steady presence of a stranger who had chosen to stand between her and danger. When Dahlia woke, pale dawn light was filtering through the cabin's single window. Preston was already up, packing supplies into saddlebags. There's water in the basin if you want to wash, he said without turning around. And I've laid out some clothes that might fit you better for riding. Dahlia glanced at the men's clothing, a shirt, pants, and a worn leather vest. Whose are they? My younger brother's. He leaves things here sometimes when he visits. Preston still didn't look at her. Figure a dress isn't the best for where we're going. Dahlia took the clothes and retreated behind a blanket Preston had hung across a corner of the room for privacy. The pants were a bit large but workable with a belt, and the shirt was soft from many washings. When she emerged, Preston gave her an appraising look. Tuck your hair up under this, he said, tossing her a battered hat. From a distance, you'll pass for a young man, might buy us some time. As she adjusted the hat, Preston handed her a cup of coffee and a plate with cornbread. Eat quick. We need to leave before the town wakes up properly. Dahlia complied, watching as Preston efficiently packed the last of their supplies. What's your plan? Head north into the mountains, then circle east toward Fort Benton. Stay off the main trails. He checked his rifle. Rollins will have men watching the direct routes. We'll take the long way around. And if they catch up to us, Preston's eyes met hers, hard and determined. Then we fight. But I aim to avoid that if possible. After they ate, Preston led her out the back of the cabin to where 2 horses were saddled and waiting, a sturdy bay gelding and a dappled gray mare. Gray's name is Smoke, Preston said, helping Dahlia mount. She's sure-footed in rough country and doesn't spook easy. They set off just as the sun was cresting the eastern mountains, keeping to the shadows of the trees that lined the edge of town. Dahlia's nerves were strung tight, expecting a shout of discovery at any moment, but they reached the northern outskirts without incident. As they urged the horses into a steady trot on the game trail Preston had chosen, Dahlia glanced back at Nevada City, growing smaller in the distance. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Really? You're risking everything for a stranger." Preston was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, 3 years ago, Rawlins wanted my land for water rights. When I wouldn't sell, 2 of his men tried to run me off. I stood my ground and there was a fight." His voice was matter of fact. "I killed one of them. Self-defense, clear as day with witnesses, but Rawlins has the sheriff in his pocket. I spent 6 months in jail before the territorial judge cleared me." He looked over at her. By then, Rawlins had moved on to easier targets, but I swore if I ever got the chance to see him get what's coming to him, I'd take it. A grim smile touched his lips. "You and those papers are that chance." Dahlia nodded, understanding his motivation better now. They rode in companionable silence for hours, climbing steadily into the foothills. Preston was clearly familiar with the terrain, choosing paths that kept them under cover as much as possible while making good time. By midday, they had reached a high ridge overlooking a vast expanse of pine forest and rolling hills. "We'll rest the horses here," Preston said, dismounting. "There's a stream just over that rise." As Dahlia slid from Smoke's back, her legs protesting after the long ride, Preston suddenly stiffened, staring back the way they had come. Following his gaze, she saw what had alarmed him, a plume of dust on the trail far below, moving steadily in their direction. "Riders," Preston said grimly. "At least 4, maybe more." "Rawlins?" Dahlia asked, though she already knew the answer. Preston nodded. "They're tracking us, found our trail faster than I expected." He quickly began repacking their saddlebags. "We need to move now." They pushed the horses harder after that, following game trails that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. The forest grew denser, old-growth pines creating a cathedral-like canopy above them. Several times, Preston led them through shallow streams, doubling back and taking new paths in an attempt to confuse their pursuers. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Preston looked up at the sky with a mixture of concern and hope. "Rain might cover our tracks," he said, "but it'll make the going tougher, especially in the dark." "Are they still behind us?" Dahlia asked, peering back through the trees. "Haven't seen sign of them for a while, but that doesn't mean much." "Rawlins has men who can track a ghost through a blizzard." Preston pointed to a rocky outcropping ahead. "There's a small cave up there, not much, but it'll shelter us and the horses for the night." The rain was falling steadily by the time they reached the cave. It was indeed small, just a deep recess in the rock face, but dry and defensible, with a clear view of the approach from below. Preston got a small fire going near the entrance, positioning it so the light wouldn't be visible from a distance. They shared a simple meal of jerky, dried apples, and hard biscuits, the warmth of the fire gradually chasing the chill from their damp clothes. "We should reach the North Fork of the Judith River by tomorrow evening," Preston said, studying a tattered map by the firelight. "From there, it's another 3 days to Fort Benton if we push hard." Dahlia nodded, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. 3 more days of running, of looking over their shoulders. 3 more days for something to go wrong. "Get some rest," Preston said, noticing her worried expression. "I'll take first watch." Dahlia wanted to protest, to insist she could take a turn, but exhaustion was settling into her bones. She nodded gratefully and curled up on her bedroll, using her saddle as a pillow. Despite her fatigue, sleep came fitfully. Each time she drifted off, the crack of branches or the call of a night bird would jerk her awake again, heart pounding. During one such moment of wakefulness, she found Preston watching her, his face softened by firelight. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Who?" "My sister Hannah. Same kind of determination, same unwillingness to back down from what's right." A sad smile touched his lips. "She died in the influenza outbreak of '67, would have been about your age now." The personal revelation surprised Dahlia. Preston had been so reserved, so focused on their journey, that this glimpse into his life felt significant. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Preston nodded acknowledgement. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you for your watch in a few hours." But he didn't wake her. When Dahlia next opened her eyes, dawn was breaking, casting long shadows through the trees. Preston was already up, saddling the horses. "You were supposed to wake me," she said accusingly, rising stiffly from her bedroll. Preston shrugged. "You needed the rest more than I did. That's not fair to you. I can pull my weight." "Never doubted it." He handed her a cup of coffee. "But I'm used to long nights and little sleep. Comes with raising horses." Dahlia accepted the coffee, but her expression remained stubborn. "Tonight, I take first watch. Non-negotiable." A hint of amusement flickered in Preston's eyes. "Yes, madam." They broke camp quickly and were on the move as the sun cleared the eastern mountains. The rain had stopped during the night, but the ground remained muddy, making for slower travel. Preston kept them moving steadily northward, always alert, frequently stopping to listen and check their back trail. By midday, they had descended from the higher elevations into a rolling landscape of pine forests interspersed with meadows bright with wildflowers. In one such clearing, they paused to rest the horses. "Beautiful country," Dahlia remarked, breathing in the scent of pine and damp earth. Preston nodded. "That's why men like Rawlins want it so badly. Land this good can make a man rich if he's willing to work it honestly." He looked at her curiously. "What will you do after? Once you've delivered those papers to Judge Harmon?" The question caught Dahlia off guard. She had been so focused on her mission that she'd given little thought to what came after. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to Helena. Maybe find a small town needing a teacher, somewhere far from here." "Ever thought about Montana's eastern territories? Lots of new settlements springing up there, families bringing children who'll need schooling." "Is that where you're from?" Dahlia asked. Preston shook his head. "Originally Missouri. Came west after the war like a lot of men, wanted open space and a fresh start." He checked the cinch on his saddle. "We should move on." As they mounted up, Dahlia suddenly froze, staring at something in the distance. Preston followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. On a ridge about a mile behind them, several riders had appeared, moving purposefully in their direction. "They've found our trail again," he said grimly. "Ride." They spurred their horses into a gallop, heading for the cover of the forest. Behind them, shouts carried on the wind as their pursuers spotted them. The next hours were a blur of hard riding. The horses pushed to their limits as Preston led them through increasingly difficult terrain. They crossed streams, scrambled up rocky slopes, and crashed through underbrush, always with the sounds of pursuit not far behind. By late afternoon, the horses were lathered and blowing hard. Preston's bay was favoring its right front leg, slowing their pace dangerously. "We can't outrun them much longer," Preston said, scanning the landscape ahead. "We need to find a place to make a stand." Dahlia's heart sank. She had hoped they might somehow shake their pursuers, but that hope was fading fast. "How many?" "5 that I've counted. Rawlins himself and 4 others." They crested a small rise and Preston suddenly pulled up short. Before them, the land dropped away into a narrow canyon, its walls steep, but not impassable. A stream ran along its bottom, and on the far side, the terrain rose again into densely forested hills. "This might work," Preston said, his mind clearly racing. "If we can get across and up the other side, we can set up an ambush. The crossing will slow them down, make them vulnerable." It was a desperate plan, but Dahlia could see no better option. They urged their tired mounts down the slope, picking their way carefully toward the stream. The water was higher than normal from the recent rain, running swift and brown with mud, but not too deep for the horses to ford. They had just reached the middle of the stream when the first shot rang out. Water splashed as the bullet struck just feet from them. Preston swore and drew his rifle, returning fire at the shadowy figures now visible at the top of the ridge they had just descended. "Go," he shouted to Dahlia. "Get up the far side. I'll cover you." Dahlia hesitated, unwilling to leave him exposed, but another shot deciding for her. She urged Smoke forward, the mare struggling against the current. Behind her, Preston's rifle cracked repeatedly as he laid down covering fire. Reaching the far bank, Dahlia dismounted and drew her revolver, taking shelter behind a large boulder. From there, she could provide her own covering fire as Preston made his crossing. For a few terrible moments, horse and rider were fully exposed in the middle of the stream. Bullets kicked up water around them and Preston hunched low over his mount's neck. Then they were scrambling up the bank and Dahlia breathed again. "Up there," Preston gasped, pointing to a cluster of boulders farther up the slope. "Better position." They led the exhausted horses higher, finding a natural formation of rocks that provided excellent cover. From this vantage, they could see the entire crossing and the approaches on both sides. "They'll have to come straight at us," Preston said, reloading his rifle. No way around for miles in either direction. Dahlia checked her revolver, trying to control her trembling hands. "I'm not much of a shot with this." "Aim low," Preston advised. "Let the recoil bring it up, and don't shoot unless they're close. Save your ammunition." They didn't have to wait long. The riders appeared on the opposite bank, 5 men as Preston had counted. Even at this distance, Dahlia could identify Victor Rawlins by his distinctive black coat and hat. The men dismounted, conferring briefly before 3 of them began to work their way down to the crossing. The other 2, including Rawlins, stayed on the ridge, rifles ready. "They're splitting up," Preston murmured. "Smart. The 2 up top will try to keep us pinned down while the others cross." He adjusted his position slightly. "I'll take the men crossing. You watch our flanks, make sure none of them try to circle around." Dahlia nodded, her mouth dry with fear but her resolve firm. The documents that could bring Rawlins to justice were still secure inside her shirt. She had come too far to fail now. The first man had reached the middle of the stream when Preston fired. The rider jerked backwards, falling into the water. The other 2 immediately scattered, seeking cover among the rocks at the stream's edge. Return fire came from the ridge, bullets whining off the boulders around them. Preston remained focused on the crossing, preventing the men below from advancing. For nearly an hour, the stalemate continued. The sun was dipping toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the canyon. Dahlia's nerves were frayed from the constant tension, her ears ringing from the gunfire. "They'll try something soon," Preston said, his voice hoarse. "They don't want to be caught here after dark any more than we do." As if on cue, movement caught Dahlia's eye not at the crossing, but along the canyon rim to their right. One of Rawlins' men had worked his way around and was now attempting to flank them. "Preston," she cried in warning, raising her revolver. The man appeared suddenly, much closer than she'd expected. Dahlia fired twice in rapid succession, missing with the first shot but catching him in the shoulder with the second. He fell back with a cry, dropping his weapon, but the distraction had served its purpose. When Dahlia turned back, she saw with horror that two riders were already halfway across the stream, using the commotion as cover for their advance. Preston had seen them too. He fired rapidly, emptying his rifle, but the riders kept coming, returning fire as they urged their horses up the bank. One man fell, clutching his leg, but the other reached the cover of the lower rocks. "We need to fall back," Preston said urgently, reaching for his pistol as he discarded the empty rifle. Higher ground. They scrambled further up the slope, leading the horses behind the largest of the boulders. The position was more exposed, but it gave them a better angle on the approaching men. The gunfire intensified as Rawlins himself now began to cross the stream. Bullets chipped stone around them, one grazing Preston's arm and drawing a sharp hiss of pain from him. "Are you hit bad?" Dahlia asked, trying to see the wound while keeping her revolver trained downslope. "Just a scratch," Preston grunted. "Keep shooting." The light was failing rapidly now, deep shadows filling the canyon. In the growing darkness, muzzle flashes betrayed positions on both sides as the gunfight continued. And then, incredibly, new voices joined the chaos shouts and the thunder of hooves from the ridge above them. "What the—" Preston began, twisting to look uphill. 4 riders appeared, silhouetted against the darkening sky. For a terrible moment Dahlia thought they were more of Rawlins' men. Then she heard one of the newcomers shout a name. "Northrup. Preston Northrup." "Here," Preston called back, relief evident in his voice. The newcomers opened fire on Rawlins and his remaining men, who suddenly found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. 2 fell quickly. Rawlins himself turned to flee, spurring his horse back across the stream, but a well-aimed shot caught him in the back. He tumbled from his saddle into the rushing water, and just like that, the shooting stopped. An eerie silence fell over the canyon, broken only by the sound of the stream and the labored breathing of men and horses. "Preston." One of the riders dismounted and approached, rifle ready but pointed down. "You alive down there?" "Alive and kicking, Jackson," Preston called back, standing cautiously. "Your timing's damn near perfect." The man named Jackson came into view, tall, bearded, wearing the distinctive jacket of a U.S. Marshal. Behind him, the other 3 men spread out, checking the fallen. "Been tracking Rawlins for 2 days, Jackson said, clapping Preston on the shoulder. "Got word he'd left town in a hurry chasing someone. Figured it must be important." His gaze shifted to Dahlia, taking in her men's clothing and the revolver still clutched in her hand. "This the someone?" Preston nodded. "Marshal Robert Jackson, meet Miss Dahlia Owens. She's carrying evidence that would have put Rawlins behind bars or at the end of a rope." Jackson's eyebrows rose. "Would have. If he survived that shot and the river, I'll eat my hat," one of the other men called up from the stream bank. "Body's gone, though. Current probably took it." Dahlia felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Rawlins was likely dead, but without a body, some might doubt it. And without a trial, the full extent of his crimes might never be known. "The papers," she said, reaching into her shirt to extract the packet of documents. "They still need to reach Judge Harmon." There were others involved, officials who took bribes, men who did Rawlins' dirty work. Jackson took the papers, leafing through them with increasing interest. "This is enough to keep the territorial courts busy for months." He looked at her with new respect. "You've done the Montana Territory a great service, Miss Owens." The adrenaline that had sustained Dahlia throughout the gunfight suddenly drained away, leaving her light-headed and shaky. Preston must have noticed, because his arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "We've got a camp set up about 2 miles north," Jackson said. "You two look like you could use a hot meal and a safe place to rest." Preston nodded gratefully. "Lead the way, Marshal." The Marshal's camp was simple but well-organized, 4 tents arranged around a central fire, horses picketed nearby. A pot of stew bubbled over the flames, and the smell made Dahlia's stomach growl audibly. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. While the Marshals tended to their own wounds and those of the prisoners, the 2 of Rollins' men who had survived the gunfight, Jackson, insisted on hearing their full story. Dahlia and Preston took turns explaining, from Daniel's murder to their desperate flight from Nevada City. "I'll send men to verify these land claims," Jackson said when they had finished, "and to round up anyone else implicated in those documents. The territorial governor will want to see these personally." He studied Dahlia thoughtfully. "You took an awful risk, Miss Owens." "My brother died for trying to expose the truth," Dahlia said simply. "I couldn't let that be for nothing." Jackson nodded, seeming to understand. "Well, you'll be safe now. We'll escort you to Fort Benton, and from there you can decide where you want to go." After they had eaten, Preston insisted on checking Dahlia's arm where the bullet had grazed her 2 days earlier. They sat slightly apart from the others, the firelight casting a warm glow on their faces. "It's healing clean," Preston said, gently rebandaging the wound. "No sign of infection." "Thank you," Dahlia said softly. "Not just for this, for everything. I wouldn't have made it this far without you." Preston's hand stilled, his eyes meeting hers. "You're a remarkable woman, Dahlia Owens. Brave, determined. Your brother would be proud." Something in his gaze made her breath catch. Over the past 2 days, facing danger together, they had formed a bond that went beyond mere acquaintance or even friendship. Dahlia had never believed in swift attachments, but there was something about this quiet, steadfast man that resonated with her own spirit. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Go back to your horse farm," Preston nodded. "It's a good life, peaceful." He hesitated. "Though I admit it can get lonesome at times." Before Dahlia could respond, Jackson approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want this," he said, handing them each a cup. "Big day tomorrow." "We'll start for Fort Benton at first light." The moment had passed, but something had shifted between them. As they prepared for sleep, Dahlia found herself watching Preston, wondering what might have been said if they hadn't been interrupted. The journey to Fort Benton took 3 days, much easier going with the Marshal's escort. Along the way, Dahlia found herself riding beside Preston more often than not, their conversations ranging from books they had read to dreams they still harbored. She learned that he had fought for the Union in the war, that he had a passion for training horses that others deemed unmanageable, that he could recite Shakespeare from memory, a skill taught by his schoolteacher mother. In turn, she told him about growing up in Wisconsin, about her love of teaching, about Daniel and the close bond they had shared. By the time they reached Fort Benton, Dahlia felt as though she had known Preston Northrup all her life, which made the impending separation all the more difficult. Judge Harmon received them immediately upon their arrival, his study in the courthouse becoming the scene of a lengthy deposition, as Dahlia recounted everything she knew about Rollins' operations. The judge was particularly interested in the names of officials who had taken bribes or turned blind eyes to the land fraud. "This will take time to unravel fully," Harmon said, carefully storing the documents in a safe behind his desk. "But justice will be served, Miss Owens. I promise you that." "What about my brother's murder?" Dahlia asked. "I'll send instructions to the Helena authorities to reopen the investigation immediately," Harmon assured her. "With Rollins' operation exposed, witnesses may now feel safe coming forward." It was more than Dahlia had dared hope for. As she left the courthouse, she found Preston waiting for her on the steps. "Good news?" he asked, seeing her expression. "The best," she replied, impulsively taking his hand. "The judge is reopening Daniel's case, and he's already issuing orders to restore the stolen lands to their rightful owners." Preston smiled, genuinely pleased for her. "So it's done, then? You've accomplished what you set out to do?" "Yes." Dahlia's smile faded slightly. "Which means it's time to decide what comes next." They walked together through the bustling streets of Fort Benton, the largest settlement Dahlia had seen since leaving Helena. River boats lined the Missouri's banks, loading and unloading goods from as far away as St. Louis. The town hummed with activity: merchants, trappers, soldiers, and settlers all going about their business. "You could stay here," Preston suggested. "Fort Benton's growing fast. They probably need teachers." Dahlia nodded noncommittally. "Or I could go back east, I suppose. My aunt in Chicago has been asking me to visit." They reached the hotel where Marshal Jackson had arranged rooms for them. On the porch, Preston turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "Dahlia, he began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. "These past few days have been, well, not exactly peaceful, what with being shot at and all." That drew a smile from her. "But getting to know you has been the best thing that's happened to me in a long while." Dahlia's heart began to beat faster. "For me too," she said softly. "I've got a good spread outside Nevada City. 200 acres, a sturdy house, and the best horses in the territory. It's not much compared to a city like Chicago, but—" He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say is, I'd be honored if you'd consider coming back with me." "As what?" Dahlia asked, needing to hear him say it. Preston's weathered face flushed slightly. "Well, that depends on you, I suppose. As a friend, certainly. Maybe more in time if that's something you might want too." He met her gaze directly. "I'm not a man for fancy words, Dahlia, but I know what I feel. And what I feel for you is something rare and precious." Dahlia studied his face, the honest eyes, the strength and gentleness that had protected her when she most needed it. In just a few days, this man had come to mean more to her than she would have thought possible. "Nevada City has a school, doesn't it?" she asked. Hope lit Preston's eyes. "It does, and from what I hear, they are in desperate need of a teacher who can stand up to the school board." Dahlia laughed. "I think I've proven I can stand up to worse than a school board." "That you have." Preston's hand reached for hers, his touch gentle but sure. "Is that a yes?" "It's a I'd like to try," Dahlia said honestly. "I can't promise more than that right now, but I know I'm not ready to say goodbye to you, Preston Northrup." The smile that spread across his face was like the sunrise. "That's more than enough for me, Dahlia Owens. More than enough." 2 weeks later, Dahlia stood on the porch of Preston's ranch house, watching as he worked with a young colt in the corral. The horse was spirited but learning quickly under Preston's patient guidance. The scene brought a smile to her face. An animal developing a relationship built on trust and mutual respect. Much like what was growing between her and Preston. Their return to Nevada City had caused quite a stir. News of Rollins' death and the exposure of his crimes had spread quickly. Some celebrated openly. Others, those who had benefited from Rollins' corrupt dealings, watched the newcomers with wary hostility. But with Marshal Jackson's men still in the area, investigating and making arrests, even the most disgruntled kept their distance. The school board had indeed been desperate for a teacher and had hired Dahlia on the spot. She would begin when the new term started in 2 weeks. In the meantime, she had accepted Preston's offer to stay at his ranch in the spare bedroom, with proprieties observed. Preston was old-fashioned that way, something Dahlia found surprisingly endearing. The ranch itself had exceeded her expectations. The house was larger than the cabin in town, with 4 rooms and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Bookshelves lined the walls of the main room, filled with volumes on history, poetry, and horse breeding. The surrounding land was beautiful rolling pastures backed by pine-covered hills, with a creek running clear and cold through the property. And then there were the horses, 24 of the finest animals Dahlia had ever seen, each one carefully bred and trained by Preston himself. His reputation as a breeder was growing throughout the territory, bringing a steady stream of buyers willing to pay top dollar for his stock. It was a good life he had built here, a life she could imagine sharing. Preston noticed her watching and waved, then said something to the young ranch hand who was assisting him and made his way over to the porch. "Enjoying the view?" he asked, removing his hat and wiping his brow. "Very much," Dahlia replied with a smile. "You have a way with them. Horses are straightforward creatures. Treat them with respect, they'll give it back tenfold." He leaned against the porch railing. "Got a letter from Marshal Jackson today." "Oh, what news?" "They found Rawlins' body, washed up 20 miles downstream, and they've arrested the county clerk and 2 deputies who were part of his operation." Preston's expression was satisfied. Judge Harmon's ordered a full audit of all land transactions for the past 5 years. "That's wonderful news," Dahlia said, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The final confirmation of Rawlins' death brought a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. "There's more," Preston continued. "They've reopened your brother's case like the judge promised. Jackson says they've already got 2 witnesses who saw Rawlins' men near the land office the night Daniel was killed." Tears pricked at Dahlia's eyes. "So he'll get justice after all." "Looks that way." Preston moved closer, his hand covering hers on the railing. "You did that, Dahlia. You made it happen." She shook her head. "We did it together." Their eyes met, and that now familiar current passed between them, the connection that had been growing stronger each day. Preston's hand gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering on her cheek. "I was thinking," he said, his voice a bit rough. "Town's having a harvest dance Saturday next. Might be a good opportunity for you to meet more folks before school starts." He cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you'd do me the honor of accompanying me." Dahlia smiled at the formal phrasing. "Are you asking me to a dance, Mr. Northrup?" "I believe I am, Miss Owens." A hint of a smile played at his lips. "Though I should warn you, I'm not much of a dancer." "Well, as it happens, I'm an excellent teacher," Dahlia replied, her heart light. "I accept your invitation." The harvest dance was held in the town hall, a large wooden building that served as Nevada City's gathering place for everything from town meetings to church services when the circuit preacher came through. For the occasion, it had been transformed with autumn decorations, dried corn stalks and pumpkins, paper lanterns hanging from the rafters, and tables laden with food brought by nearly every family in the area. Dahlia wore her best dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes. Preston had actually gone into town the day before to have his good suit pressed for the occasion, a fact that had both touched and amused her. As they entered the hall, conversation momentarily faltered as people turned to look at the newcomers. Then Martha Jenkins, the wife of the general store owner, bustled forward to greet them. "Miss Owens, Mr. Northrup, so glad you could join us." She beamed at Dahlia. "We're all so looking forward to having a proper teacher again. The children have been running wild since Miss Peterson left to get married last spring." Others came forward, then parents curious about the new teacher, ranchers who did business with Preston, women eager to welcome another female to their small community. The initial awkwardness faded as Dahlia was introduced around, her natural warmth and intelligence making a favorable impression. Not everyone was welcoming, of course. Dahlia noticed a few men watching from the corners, their expressions guarded or hostile, likely former associates of Rawlins, who had escaped prosecution but lost influence with his downfall. Preston kept her close to his side when they were nearby, his protective instincts evident. When the band of fiddle, banjo, and accordion struck up a lively reel, Preston hesitated, but Dahlia took his hand decisively. "You promised me a dance, sir," she reminded him. "So I did." He led her onto the floor with more confidence than his earlier disclaimer had suggested. "Just don't blame me when your toes are trampled." But Preston moved with the same natural grace he showed on horseback, and if he didn't know all the steps, he followed Dahlia's lead willingly. By the third dance, they were laughing together, caught up in the music and each other. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for some air. The night was clear and cool, stars blazing overhead in a way they never did in larger cities with their gas lamps and coal smoke. "Enjoying yourself?" Preston asked, draping his jacket around her shoulders as they walked a little way from the hall. "Very much," Dahlia replied truthfully. "Everyone has been so kind. They're good people, mostly. This town went through hard times under Rawlins' influence, but there's a decent foundation here." He looked down at her, his expression earnest. It could be a good place to put down roots, to build something lasting. Dahlia understood what he was really saying. "I think you might be right about that." They stopped walking, turning to face each other. In the silver moonlight, Preston's features were softened, the usual weathered determination replaced by a vulnerability that caught at Dahlia's heart. "Dahlia," he said softly, "I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you. I think I started falling for you the moment you crawled out from under my porch, covered in dirt and still ready to fight the world." Dahlia laughed, even as tears sprang to her eyes. "That's hardly the most romantic image." "It is to me." His hand came up to cup her cheek. "You're the bravest, most principled woman I've ever known. And if you'd give me the chance, I'd spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Dahlia's heart felt too full for her chest. Over these past weeks, living in Preston's home, seeing his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength, she had fallen deeply in love with him. It wasn't the whirlwind romance of novels, but something steadier and more enduring, a love built on mutual respect and shared values. "I love you too," she whispered. "And you don't have to try to be worthy of anything. You already are the best man I know." The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepening with all the emotion they had been holding in check. When they finally broke apart, Preston rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not right away if you're not ready, but someday. Say you'll be my wife." Dahlia smiled, her decision already made. Not someday, soon. Very soon. The joy that blazed in Preston's eyes was answer enough, but he kissed her again anyway, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. They were married 3 weeks later in the same town hall where they had danced, Judge Harmon himself traveling from Fort Benton to perform the ceremony. Martha Jenkins had organized the entire town to celebrate, and the small wedding Dahlia had envisioned became a community affair, with tables groaning under the weight of food and enough well wishes to last a lifetime. Marshall Jackson stood as Preston's best man, while one of Dahlia's fellow teachers served as her maid of honor. Daniel's presence was keenly felt in his absence, but a letter had arrived just days before from the territorial prosecutor, confirming that his killers had been identified and would stand trial, a wedding gift more precious than any silver or china. As fall turned to winter, Dahlia settled into her dual roles as teacher and rancher's wife. The school flourished under her guidance, the children responding to her combination of high expectations and genuine care. At home, She and Preston developed a partnership that extended beyond their deep personal bond. She kept the books for the horse breeding business, suggesting improvements to the operation that increased their profits substantially. Their first Christmas together brought a heavy snowfall that isolated the ranch for nearly a week. They spent the time reading to each other by the fire, playing chess. Dahlia usually won, and making plans for the future. It was during those quiet days that Dahlia first suspected she might be carrying their child. She kept the suspicion to herself until she was certain, finally telling Preston on a crisp February morning as they watched the sunrise from their porch. A baby. He repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "You're sure?" Dahlia nodded, suddenly nervous. "Dr. Wallace confirmed it yesterday when I was in town. He says August, probably." Preston's face transformed with such joy that her nervousness evaporated instantly. He dropped to his knees before her, pressing his ear gently against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father speaking. Your mother and I can't wait to meet you." Dahlia laughed, running her fingers through his hair. "The baby can't hear you yet, you know." "Don't listen to her," Preston told her belly. "She may be the teacher, but I know you're in there listening." He looked up at Dahlia, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you for this, for everything." The news of their impending parenthood spread quickly through Nevada City, bringing a stream of visitors bearing gifts and advice. Preston began working on a cradle, carving it from pine with careful attention to every detail. Dahlia sewed tiny clothes in the evenings, marveling at how small they were. As her pregnancy progressed, Preston became increasingly protective, insisting on hiring more help for the ranch so Dahlia wouldn't overexert herself. She continued teaching through the spring term, but agreed to take the fall term off to focus on the baby. Their son, Daniel Preston Northrup, was born on a sweltering August day in 1876, arriving after a relatively easy labor with a full head of dark hair and his father's determined chin. Preston, who had paced outside until Martha Jenkins finally took pity and allowed him in, wept openly when the midwife placed the tiny bundle in his arms. "He's perfect," he whispered, sitting carefully beside Dahlia on the bed. "Just like his mother." Dahlia touched the baby's tiny fingers, marveling at the miniature nails. "He has your eyes, I think." "Poor child," Preston joked, but his gaze was tender as he looked from his son to his wife. "I love you both so much it scares me sometimes." "No need to be scared," Dahlia assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "We're not going anywhere." Life with a newborn brought challenges. Of course, sleepless nights, endless laundry, and the constant worry that came with being responsible for such a tiny person. But it also brought a deeper dimension to their love, watching each other become parents, seeing reflections of themselves in their son. By the time little Daniel, they called him Danny, was crawling, Dahlia had returned to teaching, bringing him with her to school 3 days a week. The arrangement raised a few eyebrows initially, but the sight of the baby contentedly playing in a basket beside his mother's desk soon became a normal part of school life. On the days Dahlia taught without Danny, Preston would often bring the boy to the corrals, safely secured in a special carrier he had designed that allowed the baby to watch the horses while Preston worked. The child was fearless around the animals, reaching out pudgy hands to pat their noses whenever they came close enough. "Going to be a horseman like his father," Preston would say proudly. "Or a teacher like his mother," Dahlia would counter with a smile. "Or both," Preston would concede. Best of both worlds. As Danny grew from baby to toddler, the Northrup ranch prospered. Preston's reputation as a breeder continued to spread, bringing orders from as far away as Kansas City. They added a new wing to the house and hired 2 more full-time hands to help with the expanding operation. Nevada City itself was changing too. With Rawlins' corrupt influence gone, legitimate businesses flourished. New settlers arrived regularly, drawn by stories of fertile land and fair governance. The school grew from one room to two, and Dahlia found herself appointed as head teacher, responsible for hiring and training a young assistant to handle the younger children. Through it all, the bond between Dahlia and Preston only deepened. Their shared experiences, from that first desperate flight from Rawlins' men to the everyday joys and challenges of marriage and parenthood, had forged something unbreakable between them. On the 5th anniversary of the day they had met, the day Dahlia had crawled out from under Preston's porch, they celebrated with a picnic beside the creek that ran through their property. Danny, now 4 and full of energy, chased butterflies nearby while his parents watched indulgently. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" Dahlia asked, leaning against Preston's shoulder. "If I hadn't chosen your porch to hide under that night." Preston considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but then I think maybe it wasn't chance at all." His arm tightened around her. "Maybe we were always meant to find each other one way or another." "That's uncharacteristically romantic coming from you," Dahlia teased. "You've been a bad influence," he replied with a grin. Then, more seriously, "Are you happy, Dahlia? Truly happy with this life we've built?" Dahlia looked around at their flourishing ranch, at their son playing in the sunlight, and finally at the man beside her, still as steady and true as the day he'd first offered her shelter. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she said softly. "When I came to Nevada City, I was looking for justice for Daniel. I never expected to find a home, a family, a love like this." Preston kissed her then, a kiss filled with all the tenderness and passion that had grown between them over the years. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips, "for trusting me enough to crawl out from under that porch." Dahlia smiled, thinking of how far they had come from that desperate night. "Best decision I ever made." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land they had worked and loved together, Preston called to Danny, and the boy came running to be swept up in his father's strong arms. Together, the three of them walked back toward the house, their shadows stretching long behind them, a family forged in adversity but thriving in love, their story still unfolding in the land they now called home. 10 years later, the Northrup Ranch had grown to become one of the most prosperous in Madison County. What had begun with Preston's skilled breeding of horses had expanded to include cattle, and their land holdings now covered nearly 1,000 acres of prime Montana territory. The original house had been further enlarged to accommodate their growing family. Danny, now 14, and showing his father's gift with horses; 9-year-old Emma, who had her mother's love of books; and 7-year-old twins James and Joseph, who kept everyone on their toes with their mischief. Nevada City had grown as well, nearly doubling in size since Rawlins' downfall. The school where Dahlia had once taught was now a proper academy with 4 teachers and over 60 students. Though she no longer taught full-time, Dahlia remained on the school board and occasionally substituted when needed. Most of her time was divided between managing the ranch's finances, which had become increasingly complex with their expansion, and raising their children. Preston, at 43, was still as vigorous as ever, though his hair had begun to gray at the temples, a change Dahlia insisted made him even more handsome. His reputation as a horseman had spread throughout the Western Territories, and buyers regularly traveled great distances specifically to purchase Northrup stock. But beyond their material success, what Preston and Dahlia valued most was the life they had built together, a partnership founded on mutual respect, unwavering support, and a love that had only deepened with the passing years. On a warm September evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset after the children had been put to bed, Dahlia reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "I received a letter from Judge Harmon today," she said, her head resting on Preston's shoulder. "He's retiring at the end of the year." Preston nodded. "He's earned his rest. Man's done more to bring justice to this territory than anyone I know. Except perhaps a certain school teacher who stole some important documents," Dahlia added with a smile. Preston chuckled, pulling her closer. "I've always maintained that was the bravest damn fool thing I ever saw. And yet you helped me anyway. Best decision I ever made." He kissed the top of her head. "Though I maintain that finding you under my porch was divine intervention." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the last rays of sun painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their hands were clasped together, fingers intertwined in the easy, familiar way of a couple who had faced both hardship and joy side by side. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if we hadn't stopped Rawlins?" Dahlia asked suddenly. "If he'd managed to consolidate his hold on the county." Preston considered the question. "Hard to say. Men like that don't stop taking until someone makes them. But I do know this territory is better for what we did, what you started." He looked down at her. "Any regrets?" Dahlia shook her head without hesitation. "Not one. Every choice, every risk led us here. How could I regret that?" The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. Preston stood, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver he still kept nearby, old habits dying hard. But as the rider came into view in the fading light, his posture relaxed. "It's Danny," he said, stepping to the edge of the porch. Their eldest son cantered up on his favorite horse, a spirited bay he had helped train himself. Though only 14, Danny already sat a horse like someone born to the saddle, his form and confidence beyond his years. "Pa, Ma," he called, dismounting with a fluid grace that reminded Dahlia so much of Preston. "Mr. Thompson's mare is foaling, and he sent for you, Pa. Says she's having trouble." Preston nodded, immediately alert. Jacob Thompson was a neighbor whose farm adjoined their property to the east. "Get my bag from the barn, son. I'll saddle Thunderhead." As Preston moved to prepare for the emergency call, his expertise with horses extending to difficult births, Dahlia watched her son and husband working together with practiced efficiency. The sight filled her with quiet pride. In Danny, she could see echoes of both Preston's steadfast strength and her own determination. He would grow into a good man, she was certain. "You need me to come?" she asked as Preston returned from the barn, saddlebags packed with the tools and medicines he might need. Preston shook his head. "Stay with the little ones. Danny and I can handle it." He bent to kiss her quickly. "Don't wait up, could be a long night." "Be careful," Dahlia said, as she always did when he rode out. Preston's smile was warm and familiar. "Always am, love." As father and son rode away into the gathering darkness, Dahlia remained on the porch, watching until they disappeared from view. The life they had built was not perfect, no life ever is, but it was rich and full in all the ways that mattered. From that desperate night hiding under a stranger's porch to this moment of peaceful prosperity, the journey had been one of courage, determination, and above all, love. A love that had begun in the midst of danger and had flourished in the peace they had helped create. Dahlia Owens Northrup, once a frightened woman fleeing killers with stolen documents, was now the heart of a thriving family and community. And Preston Northrup, the quiet horseman who had chosen to protect a stranger, had found in that choice the greatest happiness of his life. As Dahlia finally turned to go inside, she paused for one last look at the land stretching out before her, their land. their legacy. The Montana Territory might still have its share of hardships and challenges, but here, in this place they had made together, there was strength enough to face whatever might come. And that, Dahlia knew with absolute certainty, was worth everything.